In the heart of the 1930s Dust Bowl, where the sky turned black with grit and the soil refused to yield, survival became a desperate art. With only lard, flour, and foraged wild greens as our pillars, we grandmas transformed meager rations into life-sustaining meals. This wasn't about culinary luxury. It was a daily, grueling war against starvation, won in the kitchen. The first staple I mastered was Hardship Bread, a dense, calorie-rich loaf born from flour, water, and lard. I would meticulously rub the lard, often the only fat I had, into the flour to create a crumbly, hearty dough. Because leavening agents were a luxury we couldn't afford, this was a quick, flat bread. The lard served a dual purpose. It made the bread palatable and provided the high-density energy required for my family's back-breaking labor. For my children and grandchildren who spent their days in the dust, this bread was their only defense against the hollow ache of constant hunger. The second lifesaver I relied on was wild green gravy. When the garden crops were buried under feet of silt, I took to the fields to forage for dandelions, lamb's quarters, and wild mustard. I learned the delicate chemistry of these plants, boiling them in multiple changes of water to leach out the harsh bitterness. The greens were then sautéed in a bit of rendered fat and thickened with a simple flour and water slurry. This gravy was more than just a meal. It was a potent source of vitamins A and C, essential to preventing the scurvy that threatened a generation weakened by the dust. The third culinary feat I practiced was lard-fried greens. In my heavy cast-iron skillet, a dollop of precious lard would begin to sizzle, and poof, the foraged greens were tossed in to crisp. The fat transformed the earthy, sometimes bitter taste of the wild plants into a rich, nutty, and satisfying dish. For my family who had forgotten the taste of fresh meat, the aroma of lard-fried greens was a powerful reminder of normalcy. It was a way to make the bitter weeds of the Great Plains not just edible, but genuinely nourishing, ensuring that even the pickiest children received the nutrients they needed to survive. These three dishes represented the pinnacle of my resourcefulness. Each meal was a lesson in survival chemistry, balancing the carbohydrates from the flour, the dense energy from the lard, and the essential micronutrients from the wild greens. These weren't just recipes, they were survival manuals I passed down. The kitchen table served as our last line of defense against the encroaching desert. Taping windows and hanging wet sheets to block the silt was often futile. The dust would always find a way in. Yet, despite the grit in the flour and membranes, the hollowness of our bellies, I created rituals of order. Preparing these meals wasn't just about nutrition. It was a stubborn act of defiance against a world that seemed to be ending. It was a victory of the human spirit over the elements, proving that even when the world turned to dust, the spirit of those who could sustain their own would always endure. Every morning began before the sun, as I carefully managed the tiny amount of fuel we had for the wood stove. I knew that every piece of kindling had to wait, because once the stove went out, we were powerless against the cold. Preparing the hardship bread required a steady hand and a keen eye. I knew exactly when the pan was hot enough by the way the lard shimmered, a skill I learned from my own mother. We didn't have thermometers, but we had instinct, an instinct forged in the fire of necessity. When I ventured into the fields to forage, I was always scanning the horizon for the next black blizzard. You learn to read the sky as clearly as a book. If the horizon turned a sickly, bruised brown, I knew I had to get the greens, get home, and get the shutters closed. Foraging wasn't just about food. It was about the timing. I taught my granddaughters that the best greens were gathered in the damp hollows where the dust hadn't yet settled, and to always shake them clean and damp, in a basin of water before they hit the skillet. I often think about the texture of the bread, how it would settle in the stomach, and provide the only warmth we'd feel all day. It wasn't the soft white loaves you see in shops today. It was heavy, a bit gray from the dust that settled on everything. But to us, it was gold. I would take the rendered fat from the last pig we butchered, the fat that had been salted and stored in a crock, and I would use it as fast sparingly as if it were diamonds. That fat was the difference between a child having the energy to walk to school and them collapsing on the roadside. These meals are the history of the Dust Bowl. They are the stories of women who stood in their kitchens, surrounded by total ruin, and decided that the fire would not go out. We turned three simple things into the fuel for a generation's endurance: We didn't have much, but we had everything we needed to keep the light burning, and that is a story worth telling for a long, long time.